Hey guys, tonight we step behind the heavy wooden doors, past the banners and echoing halls to wander the quiet, dimly lit quarters of castle servants, the ones nobody remembers, the ones whose work is the invisible heartbeat of every banquet, procession, and midnight intrigue. You probably won't survive this if you expect glamour. The stone is cold, the straw is scratchy, and the early mornings are brutal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you do that, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love imagining where in the world we're all sneaking into history together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in the gray hush before dawn, the castle still wrapped in silence except for the occasional creak of timber settling or the soft snort of a horse in the distant stables. The smell of cold stone, slightly damp from the night's condensation, fills your nose. Your blanket of rough wool itches where it touches your skin. And the straw mattress beneath you makes every movement a minor negotiation with discomfort. You trudge to the chamber door, careful not to trip over your fellow sleepers or the pile of bundles that might hide a cat or a cockroach or maybe both. Historians still argue whether such quarters were ever meant for comfort or purely efficiency. But efficiency is a cruel mistress before sunrise. The corridors are dark, lit only by torches, occasionally sputtering as they hang from iron brackets. You step softly, because even the faintest echo might wake someone. Your task is to start before anyone else, unseen, and the castle is always listening. You pass the Lord's Great Hall, where polished floors glint faintly under moonlight seeping through tall windows. Somewhere in that room, goblets and platters await, but you won't touch them yet. Your business is elsewhere, tucked in the quiet corners and behind doors that swing only for those like you. There's a rhythm to these mornings, a choreography known only to the servants. You pass the kitchens and hear the first groans of the fire being coaxed alive, wood crackling and hissing in protest. Someone stirs a pot, perhaps making broth, perhaps a porridge thick enough to choke on if you hurry. You inhale the mingled scents of barley, onions, and a hint of burnt fat kitchen smells historians note as both nourishing and relentless. Evidence that labor begins long before the banquet begins. You rub your hands together, imagining the dozen tasks ahead. Sweeping ashes, fetching water, checking the smoke of the hearth. Each step is calculated, performed without drawing attention, because the lords and ladies will rise soon, and their eyes, even sleepy ones, see more than you might expect. You brush past the laundry corner, where damp sheets hang like ghostly banners. A servant hums a tune, so soft it barely travels beyond the stone walls. You almost join in, but remember the cardinal rule. Your presence is felt only when necessary. In the distance, a dog stirs, sniffing for crumbs or warmth, reminding you that life continues even before the castle fully awakens. Every squeak of leather, every whisper of cloth, is a signal, an unspoken language that the masters will never learn because they don't need to. Only the servants move in this early hour, invisible and indispensable. Even as your body aches from the straw, even as the cold bites your fingers and toes, you can't help but admire the quiet grandeur around you. The stone walls, while unyielding, have stories etched in every groove and crack. A patch of moss here, a scorch mark, they're traces of past servants, past mistakes, past midnight heroics. You step lightly across the hall, careful not to disturb the echo, mindful that you are part of a living continuum. Fringe tales suggest that some servants might have hidden tiny talismans in the wall's good luck charms. Little curses against cruel masters, but no one will ever confirm it. And yet, you find yourself glancing at the corners, imagining that a charm could be watching you right now. Your first task is simple, yet it sets the tone for the day. Check the water. The well in the courtyard is stone cold and smells faintly of moss, and you lower the bucket with practiced precision, feeling the rope roughen your hands. You pull it up, muscles straining, and tip the water into a large container near the kitchens. Steam rises slowly, carrying the faint metallic taste of iron. This water, ordinary as it seems, will fuel cooking, cleaning, and occasionally a servant's stolen cup of tea or ale before the Lord's breakfast is even thought of. Historians still argue whether the early morning routines were more about ritual or sheer survival. And standing here, hands wet and numb, you feel the answer in your bones. A little of both. A faint clatter alerts you to the presence of another servant, equally careful and equally invisible. A nod is exchanged, silent as a shadow passing in the night. You know each other by steps and breathing as much as by sight. There's a shared understanding, almost conspiratorial, that whatever happens in these early hours remains between the walls. Spilled water, broken crockery, or a fleeting glance at the master's secret stash of sweets. You chuckle softly to yourself, thinking of how silly it is that sugar can inspire fear. But in this castle, it does. You finally return to your quarters, brushing straw from your hair and tugging at your sleeves. The first hint of dawn creeps through narrow slits in the walls, painting pale gold on gray stone. You pause a moment, letting the warmth reach your fingers. Outside, the castle stirs. Inside, you are already fully awake, a silent orchestrator of the day's unseen beginnings. You tuck your notes, plans, and secret observations into your pocket, the little things you will carry, almost like badges of honor, until the day is done. And as the first real sounds of human life echo from the main hall, you step forward into the quiet symphony of service, already knowing that by the time anyone notices, you will have been working for hours, shaping the castle's invisible rhythm. The heartbeat that nobody outside these walls will ever truly understand. The kitchens wake in a roar of flame and clang, the fire roaring like it wants to swallow the entire hearth. And you step carefully between cauldrons and spits, sensing both danger and opportunity. Steam rises in thick clouds, catching the early sunlight and turning the room into a hazy, almost mystical theater where the servants are both actors and stagehands. You trudge past the first bubbling pot of broth, its scent heavy with onions and a hint of marrow, and catch a whiff of something sweeter, perhaps the remnants of last night's pudding. Historians still argue whether medieval kitchens were centers of creativity or pure survival. And standing here, watching a lad balancing a dripping pot while humming off-key, you realize it was probably a bit of both. You maneuver around a pile of chopped vegetables, narrowly avoiding a spill, and notice a small, folded scrap of parchment tucked into the corner of a counter. A cheeky servant has scribbled a recipe so secretive it reads more like a treasure map than a cooking instruction. A pinch of cinnamon, 2 whispers of sugar, and a nod to the cat. You chuckle quietly. These are the tricks that allowed a humble servant to make a pie worth stealing from the master's own table. Fringe historians suggest that some of these recipes were considered powerful enough to sway political alliances, or at least curry favor with a grumpy noble, though no one can verify that without a chuckle and a shrug. Your hands, already damp from washing yesterday's dishes, reach for a fresh batch of pots and pans. The heat presses against your back, mingling with the pungent aroma of roasting meat and the sour temps of fermenting vegetables. Someone curses under their breath, dropping a ladle with a clatter that echoes off stone walls. You suppress a laugh. Even in these serious kitchens, chaos is inevitable. You brush past the scullery maid, whose cheeks are flushed from the stove, and she tosses you a wink-hand unspoken acknowledgement that if you're clever, you can swipe a morsel before it ever reaches the dining hall. You remember the time a colleague managed to sneak a wedge of cheese into his pocket without the cook noticing, only to be caught by a cat that apparently had impeccable taste in dairy. You check the fires again, coaxing the flames to the perfect shade of blue, knowing that the right temperature can mean the difference between a noble, satisfied nod and a disastrous dinner. One of the younger apprentices is nervously stirring a massive cauldron of soup, glancing constantly over his shoulder. You can't help but smirk. Every new hand in the kitchen learns quickly that the cook's glances are sharper than any sword. Some historians debate whether kitchen hierarchies were more brutal than battlefield ranks. And honestly, you've seen enough bruised knuckles and singed eyebrows to think there is a strong argument for it. You step aside to check on a hidden stash of spices, tucked carefully behind jars of salt and vinegar. A tiny bit of saffron, a pinch of nutmeg. Perhaps some dried rose petals. These were the secrets that could turn a mundane broth into something almost magical. Fringe tales claim that a sprinkle of these exotic spices could make a noble swoon with delight, or, if misused, ruin your entire career. You slide your fingers over the jars, feeling the rough textures of cork stoppers and the faint scent of distant lands. You think about how these small treasures, often more valuable than coin, were guarded zealously by the oldest, wisest kitchen hands. The hum of activity builds as more servants arrive, carrying bundles of firewood, sacks of grain, and fresh vegetables from the courtyard. You dodge a swinging broom, narrowly avoiding a collision, and notice the way everyone moves in a carefully choreographed chaos. Each person knows their role, their exact place, and the tiny rebellions that make life bearable. A stolen berry, a playful nudge, a whispered joke. You remember the legend of a maid who once dyed the Lord's napkins bright pink as a practical joke, a story that has been repeated with growing embellishment over decades. Historians still argue whether this tale is true or merely a cautionary fable, but it makes you grin nonetheless. A particularly aromatic roast catches your attention. The meat is glistening, seasoned with garlic, herbs, and perhaps a hint of forbidden sweetness. You reach for a taste, only to pause as the cook's sharp eyes follow your movement. Discretion is key. A pinch too much, a smile too broad, and suddenly your morning could end in chores twice as long. You settle for inhaling the aroma, letting it fill your senses like a secret indulgence. You remember the small victories. A hidden apple here, stolen crust of bread. There are tiny moments that make this grueling pre-dawn routine worth it. As the morning light strengthens, you notice the rhythm shifting. The master's household will soon stir, and the kitchen must transform from a private kingdom of controlled chaos into a production line capable of feeding dozens of nobles, their guests, and the ever-hungry staff. Pots must be scrubbed, fires must be banked or lowered, and trays must be assembled with precision. You catch sight of a small folded note tucked between a pile of napkins. Someone's idea for a secret sauce, a whisper of genius intended only for those clever enough to try it. Fringe historians suggest that some of these innovations might have influenced larger culinary trends, though proof is scarce. You tuck it into your pocket, smiling at the thought that the kitchen holds more secrets than the castle library ever could. Between chopping, stirring, and stealing glances at forbidden treats, you find a moment to observe your fellow servants. Their faces are already smeared with soot and flour, hands red from heat and cold. Yet their eyes gleam with amusement, determination, and occasional mischief. You notice the scullery maid sneaking a cherry into her mouth, a young lad tipping salt into a pot while pretending to stir, and the cook muttering quietly to himself about a roast gone slightly dry. Historians still debate whether kitchen life was the backbone of the medieval castle or merely a backdrop for nobility and standing. Here, amid the scent of onions and the hiss of boiling water, you think it might just be both. Finally, you pause near the hearth, letting the warmth seep into your bones. You glance at the chaos around you, the hidden notes, the stolen bites, the whispered instructions, and realize that this is more than just cooking. It's a carefully maintained microcosm of rebellion, art, and survival. Every pot and pan tells a story. Every spice jar carries a legacy. Every whispered instruction or mischievous trick is a testament to human ingenuity and the quiet power of those who serve. You take a deep breath, savoring the mingled aromas and the faint tang of smoke, and prepare for the next stage of your day, knowing the kitchen's secrets will guide you through the castle in ways no lord or lady could ever imagine. You slip from the kitchens, past the lingering warmth and pungent scents, into the castle corridors where the air has a different kind of weight. Stone walls, cold and unforgiving, stretch in both directions, and the silence is broken only by the soft tap of your boots and the occasional distant creak of a shutter. You've learned to move like a shadow here, gliding along the edges, brushing against tapestries that whisper secrets of their own. The corridors are alive in ways the nobles rarely suspect. Whispers echo, laughter flits like a ghost. And sometimes, if you pause long enough, you can hear the pulse of the castle itself. Historians still argue whether servants shaped the invisible social currents of the castle or merely reflected them. And walking these halls, you feel like both observer and participant. You round a corner and catch a faint murmur. Two figures are there, half hidden behind a tapestry depicting some long-forgotten battle. Their voices are hushed, careful, yet the tension in the room makes your ears perk up. You can't hear everything, but phrases like, "The Duke will never know," and "We can risk it," make your imagination run wild. Eavesdropping is practically a form of castle survival. Knowledge is power, and even the smallest detail can tip the delicate balance of hierarchy. You remember a story about a servant who once prevented a duel simply by overhearing an insult and quietly redirecting it. Fringe historians insist this is exaggerated, perhaps even mythic. Yet the idea sticks. You never underestimate the value of listening. The corridor twists, and you pass an open door leading to the Lord's private study. A candle flickers, and you see the shadow of a hand moving across parchment. You've learned which doors to avoid and which offer tantalizing glimpses of forbidden worlds. The smell of ink and old paper is intoxicating, a reminder that not all secrets are culinary or whispered. Some are written, locked away, and yet tantalizingly close. You resist the urge to peek. Too closely. Discretion is your ally, but you can almost hear the scratching quill, as if it carries a tune meant only for those who know where to listen. You continue down the hall, noticing small signs of life in the walls themselves. A scratch here, a chip there, tiny evidence of past servants, their hands leaving marks unseen by the high-born. A small knot in the wood has been polished smooth by repeated contact, perhaps from a secret knock, a coded message, or just the nervous fingers of a junior page. Fringe tales suggest that some of these marks were used as secret communication during times of rebellion or political unrest. Historians still argue whether these subtle systems were widespread or merely clever anecdotes repeated over centuries. But as you trace a finger along one worn patch, you feel the weight of continuity, the hidden conversation of generations. A door at the end of the corridor opens into a narrow stairwell. You descend quietly, counting each step in your mind to maintain rhythm, aware that your presence is both invisible and necessary. The sound of your boots echoes faintly against the stone, and you wonder if anyone above suspects a shadow moving with intent. You pass the servant who delivers messages between wings, his expression focused and eyes sharp. A nod is exchanged, a silent acknowledgement that you are part of the web of intelligence that binds the castle together. It's a delicate balance of secrecy and trust. One misstep could unravel hours of careful observation, or worse, invite punishment. You slip into a smaller hallway connecting the main chambers, where the echoes of laughter and argument blend like a soft symphony. A chambermaid passes, carrying a tray of water and wine, her steps light but purposeful. You catch a fragment of her whispered conversation. He'll never notice. But the tapestry has a loose stitch. You freeze for a heartbeat. A loose stitch might seem trivial, but in the castle, small details can reveal habits, fears, or clandestine movements. You remember a tale of a servant who discovered a hidden letter because of a single misaligned tapestry thread. Fringe historians debate whether such moments were accidental genius or intentional espionage. You decide it doesn't matter. Noticing the world around you, seeing the tiny inconsistencies, is a skill worth its weight in gold. Moving on, you pass an alcove where a janitor sweeps quietly, Broom bristles whispering against the stone. You inhale the faint dust mixed with the scent of polished metal from nearby armor racks. You imagine the conversations these alcoves have overheard over centuries. Secret alliances, whispered confessions, and arguments meant to vanish into the night. Historians still argue whether these small alcoves were designed for servants' comfort or purely as architectural necessity. But standing here, you feel their silent significance. Every nook is a witness, every shadow a confidant. As you round the final corner, you notice the faint glow of light spilling from a half-open door, a room you rarely enter. The faint aroma of herbs mingles with the scent of polished wood. Inside, a scribe sits hunched over a ledger, muttering numbers and names. You pause, listening, noticing how even the mundane tasks are infused with secrets. Who owes what? Who is favored? Who might soon fall from grace? This is the heartbeat of the castle's invisible politics. A rhythm kept alive by observation, discretion, and the courage to listen. You press your back to the wall, letting the scribe's words wash over you like a low tide of information. The corridor outside is quiet again, but you know it won't stay that way for long. Servants pass, each absorbed in their duties, yet subtly alert, a living network of eyes, ears, and small rebellions. You realize that knowing when to speak, when to act, and when to remain unseen is as vital as the work itself. This is the true skill of a castle servant: navigation, observation, and the quiet acquisition of knowledge that the lords will never notice. Finally, you pause at a landing overlooking the main hall. From here, you catch glimpses of activity below. A page tripping over a dog. The cook gesturing wildly as he directs someone to fetch a pan. The glint of polished silver catching the morning light. It's a tableau of controlled chaos, and you are part of it. Threading silently through shadows, gathering whispers and secrets like firewood for the long day ahead. Fringe historians suggest that the corridors themselves were the real power centers of castles, conduits for influence and gossip. Standing here, you understand why. It is here, in these silent spaces, that the castle's invisible currents flow strongest, shaping every decision, every rumor, every quiet triumph of the unseen. The laundry room is your next stop, and even in the early morning light, it feels like entering a secret world, one layered with damp linens, starch, and the faintly sweet perfume of soap. You trudge through puddles of water, splashing slightly as your boots squish against the stone floor. The smell is intense, a mix of wet cloth, a hint of mildew, and the faintest trace of herbs tucked into collars or pillowcases. Historians still argue whether these washing practices were primarily practical or ritualistic, a way of maintaining not just cleanliness but also order and hierarchy. Either way, there's something almost meditative in the rhythm of scrubbing, wringing, and hanging sheets to dry. You reach for a heavy bundle of damp linen, your hands slick with water, and feel the familiar tug of fibers pressed tight in a coarse bundle. One slip and you risk splashing an entire tray of neatly folded garments, or worse, drawing the ire of the head laundress, whose temper is as legendary as her starching technique. You carefully separate sheets, noticing the faint ink marks servants have hidden along hems, tiny symbols that often conveyed messages, jokes, or warnings. Fringe historians suggest that these markings might have served as secret communication channels between servants, though conclusive proof is scarce. You trace a symbol with your finger, smiling at the audacity it took to risk discovery for a small joke or a friendly nudge across the room. The steam rising from cauldrons of boiled water makes the air thick and heavy. You lift a large sheet, dipping it into the boiling water to remove stains of grease or wine, feeling the heat radiate through your arms. Someone hums quietly, a song carried from decades past, each note blending with the hiss of boiling water. Laundry in a castle is not just a chore, it's an exercise in diplomacy, in understanding hierarchy. A poorly washed tablecloth or napkin could cause scandal. A perfectly folded sheet could earn praise, fleeting as it might be. You remember a tale of a servant who once dyed a lord's undershirt bright green, resulting in confusion and laughter, though historians still argue whether the story is exaggeration or truth. The washing basin is crowded, the water murky from repeated use, and you carefully scrub at a stubborn stain, wondering what story it carries. A red blotch from wine, perhaps, or a smear of berry jam. Each mark has a past. As you work, your hands repeatedly pass over collars and cuffs, noticing faint embroidery, small tears, and the occasional hidden charm sewn into a seam. Fringe scholars have speculated that these charms were meant to protect the wearer from ill fortune or the watchful eyes of a tyrannical master. You roll your eyes gently at the thought, but cannot deny a thrill at the possibility of touching something infused with intention beyond mere cleanliness. The sound of wringing is rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You twist sheets, feeling the water squeeze through your fingers, droplets falling to the stone floor with a steady plunk. Nearby, a young apprentice struggles with a large blanket, and you lend a hand, adjusting the folds so that it can be hung over a railing to dry. The smell of starch, mixed with faint traces of lavender and rosemary, fills your lungs, and you catch a fleeting whiff of soap used only for the master's undergarments, stronger, sweeter, carefully guarded. You pause a moment, imagining the care and secrecy that went into maintaining appearances, and wonder what stories lie hidden in these everyday rituals. Sheets, shirts, and table linens hang like banners along the drying racks, the fabric swaying gently with drafts, sneaking in through stone grates. You notice fingerprints left behind by previous handlers, faint smudges that almost feel like signatures, tiny evidence of the human presence that animates the castle. Fringe historians argue whether these marks are intentional messages or simply the residue of work. But as you trace your finger over a faint imprint, you feel connected to a chain of unseen laborers, each contributing to the silent narrative of the castle. Between scrubbing and hanging, you pause to examine a bundle of collars. One has a faint stain in the shape of a handprint, perhaps from a hurried breakfast spill or a playful prank. You recall a story of a servant who once used these stains to identify which shirts belonged to which lord or lady, a clever workaround to the chaos of laundry day. Historians still debate whether such small acts of ingenuity were widespread or anecdotal. But standing here with bundles of damp linen, you can see the logic, the quiet intelligence, the subtle power hidden in daily chores. You move to the starch, dipping sheets into a mixture of water and flour. Feeling the paste cling stubbornly to the fibers. The smell is faintly sweet and oddly comforting, a reminder that even the most monotonous tasks have their rituals and rewards. A slight misstep and the entire batch can harden too stiffly, creating a ripple effect of dissatisfaction, yet the risk adds a layer of tension that makes the day feel alive. Fringe stories speak of servants deliberately softening the master's napkins or stiffening them to signal loyalty or dissent. Small acts of rebellion hidden in plain sight. Folding is next, each movement precise and deliberate. You tuck corners and smooth edges, imagining the sheets in the beds of the lords and ladies who will never see the work behind them. Each fold carries a silent message of care, skill, and sometimes mischief. You pass a pillowcase with a faint stain in the corner, spot no one will notice, but it carries a story. A reminder of meals spilled in sleep or hurried mischief during an afternoon nap. Historians still argue whether servants left such marks intentionally as playful signatures or whether it was purely accidental. But as you handle it, you smile at the thought that the laundry is a canvas of human experience. By mid-morning, the room is a symphony of splashing, folding, and laughter. You step back to survey the work. Bundles neatly arranged, wet fabrics hanging to dry, the scent of starch and herbs mingling in the air. It's exhausting, yes, but there is pride in the rhythm, the mastery, the subtle artistry hidden in mundane labor. You remember the first time you realized that laundry was not just about cleanliness, it was about understanding hierarchy, navigating human moods, and preserving secrets. Every fold, Every scrub, every careful hanging of a sheet is an act of invisible craftsmanship. A quiet declaration that even in service, you leave your mark on the castle. Finally, as you gather the last batch to wring and hang, you take a deep breath, letting the mingled smells fill your senses, feeling the warmth of steam against your chilled skin. You glance at a small scrap of cloth left behind, faintly embroidered with initials or symbols you cannot quite decipher. Fringe historians suggest such items were often tokens of affection or secret alliances among servants, small traces of humanity hidden within the endless labor. You tuck it into your pocket, a keepsake, a reminder that even in toil, there is room for play, for story, for connection. And as you step back into the corridor, dripping and fragrant, you feel the pulse of the castle. Alive in every shadow, every stone, and every quietly triumphant act of those who labor unseen. You leave the laundry behind, stepping into the stables where the smell of hay, manure, and leather greets you like an old friend. The air is thick with warmth from the animals and the faintly sweet scent of oats, mixing in a way that seems almost intoxicating after the damp, soapy laundry room. You trudge carefully across loose straw, the crunch underfoot punctuated by the occasional snort or shuffle from the horses. Historians still argue whether stables were considered a noble space or simply a functional necessity, but standing here with sunlight streaming through high windows and dust motes dancing in the beams, you sense that it is both sanctuary and workplace. A massive chestnut mare lifts her head as you approach, nostrils flaring, eyes dark and intelligent. You run a hand along her neck, feeling the warmth and the muscles beneath the sleek coat. Horses are more than beasts of burden. They are companions, confidants, and sometimes collaborators in secret games. Fringe tales suggest that some stable servants would whisper messages into a horse's ear, trusting the animal to carry the secret, or at least to keep it to itself. You chuckle at the thought, imagining a horse as a silent witness to gossip, then gently pat the mare again, sensing the quiet bond forged over countless dawns. You move past the stalls, each echoing faintly with hooves and soft shuffling, noting the meticulous care that goes into grooming, feeding, and mucking. The younger pages run around, nervously balancing pails of water and oats, trying not to spill while hoping not to be scolded. You remember a story about a servant who once secretly dyed a horse's tail with berry juice, causing mild panic and laughter when the Lord first noticed. Historians still debate whether such pranks were common or exceptional, but standing here, amid the scent of hay and leather, you can easily imagine it happening. A slender boy is brushing a horse's flank, humming a tune you recognize from the kitchens. Music threads its way through every part of the castle, from corridors to kitchens to stables, carried in small, private bursts. You pause, letting the rhythm of the brushing and the soft swish of the tail wash over you. It's hypnotic in its own way, the kind of gentle repetition that allows both horse and servant to exist in a shared, silent understanding. Fringe historians have speculated that songs sung in stables could affect the behavior of the horses, though whether it's superstition or a practical calming technique remains debated. Either way, the sound blends seamlessly into the castle's hidden symphony. Hay dust tickles your nose as you kneel to adjust a blanket on a smaller pony, brushing it carefully to remove debris. Your hands smell faintly of straw, oats, and leather, a scent that lingers even after you've left the building. You notice a half-hidden corner where two stable hands whisper, one occasionally glancing toward the loft above. Their conversation is light but charged with subtle meaning, a mixture of complaint, gossip, and planning. You've learned that stable corners are perfect for clandestine exchanges. The noble ear rarely ventures this far, and even if it does, it seldom grasps the subtext. You approach a trough where water ripples gently, the horses dipping their muzzles with rhythmic grace. You refill the buckets carefully, mindful not to spill, watching the reflections ripple across the surface. The mundane act of providing water becomes almost ceremonial here. The timing, the precise distribution, the silent acknowledgement of each animal's temperament. Fringe stories hint that some stable servants would intentionally delay water or add a hint of sugar to curry favor or test obedience. But whether these anecdotes are accurate or fanciful is up for debate. You hum to yourself, imagining the subtle power a servant can wield over both animals and, indirectly, their masters. A chestnut colt nuzzles your shoulder, warm and eager, and you scratch behind his ears, feeling a surprising amount of trust radiate from him. You think about the countless hours required to maintain not only the animal's health, but their cooperation, the fine balance between discipline and care. Historians still argue whether stable routines were strictly functional or also a training ground for loyalty, cunning, and observation. Standing here, brushing, feeding, and murmuring gentle words, you feel that you are participating in all of the above. The morning routine is punctuated by small games of mischief. A servant hides a bit of hay to tease a particularly impatient horse. Another tucks a carrot in the folds of a boot as a prank. These moments, small and fleeting, carry immense joy, offering relief from endless labor. You grin quietly, remembering a tale of a stable boy who once trained a horse to nod at certain words, as if understanding secrets too complex for the human ear. Fringe historians argue that such accounts are embellished, yet imagining it makes you almost hope they are true. You sweep the floor, tossing clumps of straw into a corner, while the other hands reposition saddles, polish bridles, and adjust straps. The rhythm is hypnotic, the choreography unspoken but perfectly executed. You notice the interplay of gestures and glances, the subtle signals of hierarchy and familiarity. A seasoned, stable hand points with a flick of a wrist, a younger one nods without words, and the colt prances in acknowledgement of the quiet command. Historians still debate how much autonomy was granted to stable servants versus how tightly rules were enforced, and watching these movements, you see both extremes in motion. Feeding time is next. You scatter oats in wooden troughs, listening to the horses munching, the scrape of hooves on stone, and the occasional whinny of impatience. You marvel at how much of the castle's heartbeat is carried here, in the quiet labor of tending to animals that symbolize both status and freedom. Fringe stories tell of a servant who once led a horse into the Lord's hall, unnoticed until a hoof clopped onto polished floors, a minor scandal that became legendary. You imagine the thrill of that moment. It's the adrenaline of bending rules without getting caught, and you tuck that sense of daring into the morning's routine. By late morning, the stables are calm but alive, each animal settled, each task completed with quiet efficiency. You step back, letting the sun glint off polished bits of tack, the smell of leather mingling with straw and dust, and take a deep breath. There is pride here, in these mundane victories, in the unspoken bonds between humans and horses, and in the subtle mischief that keeps spirits alive. Every brushstroke, every bucket filled, every whispered joke contributes to the invisible life of the castle, a secret world that exists just beneath the notice of those who occupy the halls above. And as you leave the stables, brushing straw from your cloak, you carry with you a sense of accomplishment, a silent understanding that the pulse of the castle runs through hay, leather, and the hearts of those who serve. You enter the private chambers with the quiet confidence of someone who knows both the rules and the hidden loopholes. The air is different here, warmer, scented with faint traces of lavender, beeswax, and polished wood. Draperies hang heavy, catching the morning light, and the gleam of brass fittings tells you that appearances matter more than function. You trudge softly across rugs that, to anyone else, might seem luxurious, but to you feel like thick obstacles to navigate carefully. Historians still argue whether chamber duties were purely menial or whether they allowed servants subtle influence over daily life, and, as you adjust a cushion and brush a stray lock of hair from a lordess' sleeve, you feel both power and invisibility. Your first task is brushing armor left out from yesterday's inspection. Each plate, polished until it gleams, reflects the flickering light in sharp glints. You run your cloth over the steel, noticing fingerprints from careless hands, dust from the corridor, and the faint smudge from last night's hurried meal. Fringe historians suggest that some armor polishing rituals doubled as subtle messaging systems, tiny marks, or scratches, indicating allegiance, tasks completed, or secrets passed along. You smile at the thought, imagining generations of servants silently embedding their own signatures into the very tools of nobility. Next, you fluff pillows, straightening the creases so that no lump disturbs the bed. There's a rhythm to the work, almost meditative, and the faint smell of feathers mingles with the lingering scent of beeswax and soap. A cheeky apprentice attempts to slide a tiny folded note under one of the pillows, which you catch just in time. It's a message, perhaps a joke, perhaps a warning, and it reminds you that even the most mundane tasks are laced with communication, subtle rebellion, and human cleverness. Historians still debate whether such small acts were commonplace or exceptional, but you know from experience that clever servants often leave their mark in the quietest ways. You move to tidy the Lord's desk, adjusting quills, straightening ledgers, and ensuring that no smudge or misaligned paper betrays the order expected in this space. The smell of ink rises faintly, and you notice the curl of a forgotten letter in the corner. You resist the temptation to read it, aware that discretion is both shield and currency. Fringe accounts suggest that some servants used brief access to documents to influence outcomes in subtle ways. Though whether these interventions were widespread or isolated incidents remains debated. The wardrobe beckons next. Rows of clothing, some embroidered and jeweled, others simple but meticulously maintained, hang like silent witnesses. You check for stains, tighten straps, and notice the small touches that indicate personality: folded sleeves, tucked collars, and embroidered handkerchiefs tucked just so. Fringe stories hint that servants occasionally added tiny embroidered symbols to clothing to convey jokes, warnings, or secret loyalties, invisible to the untrained eye. You brush a sleeve, imagining the stories carried in the fabric: spilled wine, hurried repairs, and playful alterations made in the dead of night. Historians still argue whether such small interventions were tolerated or quietly celebrated. And as you move through the garments, you sense the quiet negotiation of power embedded in every fold. Your attention turns to the fireplace, the hearth still faintly warm from yesterday. You sweep out ashes carefully, noting tiny fragments of burnt matches or scraps of paper, sometimes used to convey secret messages between servants. You remember a story of a maid who once hid a note in the hearth that later influenced a household argument, an incident historians debate with skepticism, but which nevertheless captures the ingenuity of those who live in the shadows of the castle. You toss ashes into the bucket, mindful of the quiet lessons embedded in routine. That small actions ripple far and sometimes leave a legacy beyond your sight. Polishing furniture comes next. The desk, chairs, and small tables gleam under your cloth, reflecting light in sharp angles. You notice faint fingerprints where someone's curiosity or impatience betrayed them, tiny evidence of human presence. Fringe tales suggest that some fingerprints were intentionally left as markers for others in the service, signaling readiness, warning, or jest. Historians still argue whether such practices were accidental, playful, or strategic. But for you, each polished surface is both work and canvas, a place to leave an invisible signature of care and intelligence. You step back to check the room, noting the subtle ways it communicates its own hierarchy. The Lord's personal effects, neatly arranged and gleaming, speak to authority, taste, and order. Yet the tiny details: the angle of a curtain, the smoothness of a pillow, the faint scent of lavender tucked in corners speak to those who watch, adjust, and manipulate behind the scenes. You realize that chamber service is not simply about cleanliness. It's about influence, negotiation, and the quiet exercise of judgment. You straighten a chair just slightly more than usual, aware that subtle gestures ripple through the household in ways the masters never perceive. A soft laugh escapes you as you recall a past prank, The time someone placed a small, harmless figurine in the Lord's bed to elicit surprise. It was discovered, of course, but only after considerable amusement had spread through the servant ranks. Fringe historians debate whether such pranks were isolated acts of fun or a part of a wider pattern of minor resistance. But standing here, brushing sheets and polishing brass, you recognize the spirit of quiet rebellion that suffuses these rooms. Finally, you pause at the window, letting the sunlight warm your face and the scent of polished wood and lavender mingle in your nose. The chamber is in perfect order, yet beneath the surface, you know the room carries stories, tricks, whispers, and secrets. Each object, each fold, each carefully hidden note is part of a web that only those who serve fully understand. Historians still argue whether chamber service was truly subordinate or subtly powerful. And in this moment, you feel the truth. Influence exists wherever attentiveness, discretion, and quiet courage meet. With a final glance around, you step back into the corridor, leaving behind gleaming surfaces, fragrant linens, and the invisible signature of a day begun in careful, creative service. You move cautiously into the castle's hidden corners, the areas the casual visitor or even the Lord's trusted eye rarely notices. Dust motes dance in thin shafts of sunlight cutting through narrow cracks, and the air carries a mix of stone, mildew, and the faint whisper of centuries of secrets. You trace your fingers along rough walls, feeling the tiny grooves worn smooth by hands long gone. Fringe historians suggest that some of these hidden spaces were used for secret meetings, clandestine exchanges, or even illicit storage. Though evidence is often fragmentary and debated, you smile, sensing that for every door or passage marked on the official plan, there are 10 more known only to those who serve. Your first stop is a small closet tucked behind a tapestry depicting a long-forgotten battle. The fabric is thick and heavy, muffling sound and hiding the space from casual eyes. You step inside and immediately notice faint scuff marks on the stone floor, tiny scratches that hint at repeated foot traffic. You crouch to examine them, imagining the sequence of stealthy movements, whispered messages, and hurried footfalls that have occurred here over decades. Historians still argue whether such spaces were intentionally designed for secrecy or repurposed by inventive servants. But standing here, you sense the deliberate utility embedded in every corner. You move along a narrow stair, hidden behind a false panel. The wood creaks softly under your careful steps, and the scent of aged timber and dust fills your nose. Fringe stories claim that some stairways were built to allow servants to navigate the castle unseen, carrying messages, small parcels, or even illicit tidbits of gossip. You pause at a landing, peering through a small slit in the wall to see the main hall below. No one notices you? You are the ghost in the machine, moving with knowledge and discretion. A series of stone niches catches your eye next. They are small, almost invisible, perfect for hiding trinkets, messages, or other curiosities. You crouch, running your hand along one, and find a tiny carved figure tucked behind an old candle stub. You smile. Someone long ago left a playful token, perhaps a charm or a secret joke. Fringe historians argue that such items might have been tokens of affection or coded signals, though without written records, certainty is elusive. You tuck it into your pocket, a small link to the lives of those who moved invisibly before you. As you continue, you discover a narrow passage behind a false wall, barely wide enough for a single person. The stone is rough, and the air is cool and slightly damp. You step carefully, imagining how many feet have passed here in secret pages carrying messages, scullery hands slipping from one wing to another, or lovers meeting in hushed rendezvous. Historians still debate whether these passages were a product of architectural foresight or serendipitous accident. But to you, the purpose is obvious. They are the lifeblood of clandestine life in the castle. You pause near a forgotten alcove that smells faintly of herbs. A small bundle of dried rosemary and lavender rests in the corner, tied neatly with string. Fringe tales suggest that servants used these bundles as protective charms, carrying scents to guard against illness, misfortune, or nosy eyes. You inhale deeply, the faint aroma grounding you in a sensory connection that spans generations. You realize that even the tiniest details, aromas, textures, subtle movements carry knowledge, skill, and intention, a quiet testament to the ingenuity of those who labor unseen. A low hatch in the floor catches your attention next. You kneel to examine it, noticing scratches around the edges, as though it has been opened and closed countless times. Sliding it open, you find a shallow storage space containing old ledger books, worn coins, and scraps of parchment. Someone, long ago, used this small hidden compartment to stash items they couldn't risk leaving in the open. Fringe historians speculate that such caches may have carried messages, bribes, or tokens of loyalty. You carefully close the hatch, imagining the nervous hands and quick breaths of the person who last used it. You move along a corridor where faint murals are nearly obscured by soot and time. You brush a finger along a faded scene, noting figures that seem to whisper, their eyes almost following your movements. Historians still argue whether these murals were purely decorative or served as mnemonic tools for servants, helping them navigate the castle or remember tasks. Fringe accounts suggest that servants could have left subtle alterations or marks to communicate messages invisible to the untrained eye. You trace a tiny chipped corner, wondering who passed here before you, carrying secrets in silence. The spiral staircase at the end of the hall leads you up to a loft few notice. The air grows colder, and the smell of old straw and pigeon feathers fills your nose. You step carefully, noting a loose board that shifts slightly underfoot. Someone, long ago, left it intentionally loose, a secret marker or shortcut. You crouch to inspect it, finding faint scratches and worn edges that confirm repeated use. Fringe historians claim that clever servants could navigate from one wing to another entirely unseen, carrying intelligence, contraband, or personal messages a network invisible to the masters who walked above. Finally, you pause at a small, narrow window high above the courtyard. The morning sun paints the stone in soft gold, and you lean slightly to watch the activity below. Servants move with purpose. Horses paw the ground, and the castle hums with life just beyond this hidden vantage point. You feel the thrill of invisibility, the power of knowing paths and corners, secret hatches and hidden alcoves, each one a stage for tiny acts of cleverness or quiet rebellion. Historians still debate the significance of such hidden spaces, but you know from experience that they carry stories, rituals, and human ingenuity far richer than any official record. As you step back, brushing dust from your sleeves, you carry a sense of connection to the generations of servants who navigated these corners, shaping the castle's unseen history in ways both practical and profound. You slip silently into the servants' quarters, a cramped yet lively hub of whispered conversation, soft laughter, and the faint aroma of dried herbs tucked into pillows. The morning sun filters through narrow windows, casting pale squares of light onto rough wooden floors. And you trudge along the passageways lined with bunks and small personal chests. Here, away from the eyes of the lords and ladies, the true life of the castle pulses. Friendships are forged, minor rebellions plotted, and tales exchanged with subtle exaggeration. Historians still argue whether these quarters were merely functional or also a crucible for social maneuvering. And as you sink into the rhythm of this bustling microcosm, you sense it is decidedly both. You notice a small group clustered around a table, passing a folded piece of parchment from hand to hand. It's a game, a map of hidden corridors, secret cupboards, and tiny weaknesses in the master's routines, drawn with painstaking care. Fringe historians claim that such maps existed in many castles, often circulating among trusted servants to improve efficiency or for light-hearted amusement, though evidence is sparse. You crouch beside them, tracing the lines and whispering quietly, feeling part of an invisible strategy that shapes the day before it has even fully begun. A young maid stifles a giggle as she hides a small piece of bread under her apron, clearly planning a later snack or perhaps a gift for a favorite colleague. You smile, recalling your own minor heists. A crust of cheese slipped from the kitchen, a stolen apple that became a shared secret. These small acts of rebellion are essential to morale. They create bonds, tiny sparks of joy in long, laborious days. Historians still debate whether these acts were widespread or merely legendary. But standing here, you see the undeniable spirit of ingenuity and defiance. You pass a line of bunks, noticing personal effects tucked beneath straw mattresses, carved wooden tokens, scraps of ribbon, a tiny embroidered charm. Fringe tales suggest these items held meaning beyond decoration, mulets for protection. Secret messages or tokens of affection exchanged between servants. You pick up a small carved figure, running your fingers over the smooth wood, imagining the careful hands that shaped it in stolen moments. The simplicity of the object belies the complexity of the life surrounding it. Hierarchy, secrecy, loyalty, and mischief, all woven together. Laughter bubbles softly from a corner where two young pages are engaged in a playful duel with wooden spoons, their improvised swords clashing lightly. You watch as they duck and weave, skill and exuberance intertwined. Historians still argue whether play among servants served as informal training or mere amusement. But you know both to be true. Each playful jab and careful parry teaches coordination, strategy, and subtle awareness skills as valuable in espionage or mischief as in daily chores. You chuckle quietly, remembering a story about a stable boy who once outmaneuvered a visiting page in an elaborate broom duel, earning both admiration and gentle scolding. A small stove hisses in the corner, a kettle perched atop it. Someone has brewed a weak tea, the scent of herbs mingling with the lingering smell of ash. You pour a cup for yourself, inhaling the steam, and feel a sense of temporary respite. Fringe historians claim that these tiny rituals, shared cups of tea, or nibbling secret snacks, formed an essential emotional lifeline for the servants, sustaining morale and a sense of community in a demanding environment. You nod in quiet agreement, taking a sip and savoring the warmth. You move to the communal chest, carefully lifting the lid to reveal folded clothing, spare shoes, and a few treasured items. Among them is a small embroidered handkerchief, its edges frayed but cared for meticulously. A faint perfume clings to the fabric, perhaps a gift from a visiting noble, or more likely a keepsake exchanged between friends. Historians still debate whether such personal items were considered contraband or merely tolerated. But you know their importance in shaping identity, memory, and quiet resistance. You tuck it carefully aside, respecting its value as both artifact and connection. The room is punctuated by quiet chatter, advice on chores, shared complaints about rigid schedules, whispered jokes at the expense of overbearing cooks or masters. You pause to listen, catching fragments of conversation. A tale of a hidden pantry, a joke about a lord's peculiar habits, a plan to sneak an extra helping of pudding. Fringe historians suggest these verbal exchanges were as crucial as physical labor in creating social cohesion, and you nod, appreciating the invisible threads of trust, knowledge, and camaraderie that weave the servants into a functioning network. A small pile of letters rests on a bench, messages passed discreetly between wings, often carrying requests, apologies, or minor instructions. You carefully examine the handwriting, noting subtle flourishes and peculiarities that hint at personality and intent. Some are practical, others playful, and a few carry the faint thrill of risk, the possibility that discovery could bring scolding, laughter, or even favor. Historians still argue whether these letters were common tools of communication or exceptional curiosities. But in the ebb and flow of servant life, they serve as vital instruments of coordination and connection. Finally, you pause at the window, peering out at the courtyard below. Sunlight gleams off stone. Horses shift in their stalls, and the bustle of the day begins to take shape. You lean back against the wall, absorbing the sense of quiet purpose, camaraderie, and ingenuity that fills this modest quarters. Fringe stories hint that some of these rooms doubled as planning hubs for minor rebellions, theatrical pranks, or secret romances. And you find it plausible, imagining the possibilities hidden within these walls. Historians still debate the significance of servant quarters in shaping castle culture. But standing here, breathing in the mingled scents of herbs, straw, and quiet laughter, you feel the living truth. This is where the invisible life of the castle hums strongest, pulsing with human ingenuity, subtle resistance, and enduring bonds. You emerge from the servants' quarters into the castle's grand halls, where the echoes of marble footsteps, distant laughter, and clattering dishes mingle in a soft, constant hum. The contrast is immediate. The corridors of labor and camaraderie you just left are replaced with opulence, gilded carvings, and the faint smell of incense lingering from morning prayers. You tread lightly, acutely aware that your presence is nearly invisible, yet carries the responsibility of observation. Historians still argue whether servants wielded subtle power in these spaces or simply mirrored the whims of their masters. And you sense both truths coexisting. You pause before a large tapestry depicting a hunting scene. Its colors are rich, its threads meticulously woven. Yet you notice small imperfections along the edges, tiny frays, and uneven stitching. Fringe historians suggest that some servants deliberately altered tapestries, embedding symbols or messages only visible to those who knew where to look. You lean closer, feeling the raised threads, imagining the delicate handwork and the secret communication hidden in plain sight. The idea is exhilarating. Even the most rigidly controlled spaces have room for subtle rebellion and human ingenuity. Your next stop is the kitchens, already bustling with activity despite the hour. Pots clang, flames hiss, and the scent of baking bread and roasting meat fills the air. You navigate between cooks and scullery hands, noting the precision and rhythm required to avoid chaos. A young apprentice drops a spoon, and you catch it instinctively, preventing a clatter that might draw unwanted attention. Fringe historians suggest that kitchen staff often served as the castle's intelligence network, overhearing conversations, noting visitors, and passing subtle cues to other servants. You smile at the thought, realizing that even the clatter of spoons carries information if one listens carefully. You glance toward the pantry, where jars of preserves, salted meats, and dried herbs line the shelves. A small, folded note peeks out from behind a row of flour. Sacks a message, surely intended for discreet eyes only. You resist the urge to peek too closely, aware that your careful discretion is part of the invisible chain that maintains order. Historians still debate whether such minor interventions significantly influenced castle life, but you know from experience that small actions, nudging a jar, hiding a note, noticing a shift in routine, carry outsized importance. Passing through the hall, you notice a cluster of servants near the wine cellar door, whispering quietly. Their conversation is a careful mix of rumor, advice, and humor. You catch fragments. Did you see the Duke's hat? Wait until tonight's supper. The Countess will never know. Fringe accounts suggest these whispered interactions often shaped household dynamics, from minor conflicts to subtle favors, and you nod, appreciating the layered network of communication invisible to the nobles above. You pause near a grand fireplace where the morning sun catches the polished brass and dark stone, casting patterns of light across the floor. A page is carefully arranging logs, humming a tune you recognize from the stables. The melody carries through the hall, barely perceptible, blending with the sense of wax and smoked timber. Historians still argue whether these small, seemingly trivial routines were purely practical or carried symbolic meaning. Yet you sense the ritual embedded in repetition, a quiet affirmation that the castle's daily life depends on meticulous, invisible labor. A narrow side door leads to the larder, where rows of barrels and casks glint under dim light. You step carefully, mindful of the delicate balance of storage, preservation, and access. A small mouse scurries past, and you suppress a chuckle, recalling tales of servants who befriended or battled the creatures inhabiting these spaces. Fringe historians even suggest that minor wildlife in the castle contributed to small acts of surveillance, like alerting servants to nocturnal activity. You shake your head with mild amusement, but note the practical truth. Knowing the habits of every creature in the castle can be surprisingly useful. You move toward the grand dining hall, still empty, its polished floors reflecting the early sun. You pause at the head table, adjusting a misplaced silver goblet. The gesture is small but significant. An unnoticed shift ensures symmetry, a sense of order, and avoids potential critique. Fringe stories claim that servants sometimes left subtle cues in table arrangements, signaling approval, protest, or inside jokes. Historians still argue whether these practices were intentional or coincidental, but the meticulous attention to detail reinforces your awareness of how much power lies in quiet acts of observation. A distant laugh draws your attention to the servants' passage near the side entrance. A pair of maids exchange a private joke, ducking behind a pillar before the corridor opens fully into view of the Lord's wing. You notice a small slip of cloth caught in the folds of the tapestry, a marker, a reminder, perhaps a signal to others who understand the language of subtlety. Fringe historians suggest these signals could communicate anything from impending inspections to opportunities for harmless pranks. You smile, knowing that every gesture, every hidden marker, is part of a delicate choreography that maintains both order and morale. Finally, you pause in a shadowed alcove overlooking the main hall. From here, you see the full tapestry of castle life. Servants bustling unseen, nobles unaware, animals shifting, kitchens clattering, messages passed, and secrets layered atop one another. You feel the pulse of the castle here, in the interplay of discretion, observation, and subtle influence. Historians still debate the true significance of servant activity in shaping noble decisions. Yet you know that life behind closed doors is vibrant, intricate, and profoundly human. Every whispered word, careful movement, and quiet glance contributes to the invisible history of the castle, one that pulses in rhythm with the heartbeats of those who serve and observe. You step into the late afternoon shadows of the castle, moving through corridors now quieting as the midday bustle fades. Light slants sharply through narrow windows, catching dust and gold beams, and the air carries a mixture of lingering warmth from kitchens, faint hay from stables, and the subtle scent of old wood. You feel a gentle weight of tired muscles, the pull of another long evening ahead, yet your mind remains alert, attuned to the invisible threads that connect the castle's life. Historians still argue whether the ebb and flow of servant activity shaped daily life or simply mirrored it. And standing here, you sense the delicate truth. The two are inseparable. You make your way toward the Lord's private corridors, careful to stay in the shadowed edges, avoiding polished floors and sudden glints of sunlight that might betray your presence. A tapestry flutters slightly as a draft passes, revealing faint scuff marks and traces of hidden hands that have adjusted its position countless times. Fringe historians suggest these adjustments were sometimes secret signals, guiding servants or communicating messages beyond the notice of the highborn. You pause, tracing a finger along a seam, imagining the careful, silent choreography of generations. The small study opens before you, and the smell of parchment and ink fills the air. A candle flickers, casting dancing shadows across shelves of ledgers and documents. You step quietly, noticing papers arranged just so, quills aligned in a subtle perfection that conveys both order and control. Fringe tales hint that servants occasionally adjusted these items to signal readiness, relay messages, or leave gentle jokes. Historians still debate whether such acts were widespread or merely occasional cleverness, but in this quiet space, you feel the full weight of hidden labor shaping the visible world. A chest near the window is next. You open it to find carefully folded garments, their scent of lavender and beeswax intact. Fingers trace the edges, smoothing small wrinkles. Fringe historians speculate that servants sometimes left hidden notes, tiny tokens, or secret markers tucked among clothing to communicate across the household. You lift a neatly folded cuff and feel a sense of connection to those who served before you, linking centuries of subtle gestures, small rebellions, and quiet triumphs that existed unnoticed by the lords and ladies above. You move on to the side passage, a narrow corridor where the faint scent of herbs lingers. A small bundle of dried rosemary and sage rests in a corner, a relic of earlier care or protection rituals. Fringe tales suggest that servants tucked such bundles strategically, believing they could ward off illness, bad luck, or watchful eyes. Historians still argue whether these were practical or symbolic, but the act itself feels deliberate, a layer of intention imbued in daily routines. You pick it up briefly, inhaling the faint aroma, and tuck it into your pocket as a reminder that even in service, human ingenuity and belief find their way into the smallest spaces. The servant's passage leading to the kitchens hums faintly with energy, and you pause to observe a pair of maids carrying baskets of fresh bread. They move with precision, whispering quietly, occasionally exchanging small smiles or gentle nudges. You note the subtle communication in their gestures, a silent coordination that ensures efficiency, preserves morale, and maintains secrecy. Fringe historians suggest these routines were as much about managing the human network as moving goods. And standing here, you see the truth in this. The castle's heartbeat exists as much in the quiet efficiency of its laborers as in the grandeur above. You round a corner to the wine cellar, the cool air striking pleasantly against your warm skin. Barrels line the walls, the faint scent of oak and fermented grapes filling the space. You check for small leaks, misaligned stoppers, and the occasional forgotten scrap of parchment tucked between casks. Fringe stories claim that such spaces were sometimes used for minor clandestine exchanges or secret storage. Historians still debate whether these accounts reflect reality or legend. But you notice how easily this unassuming space becomes a theater for human cleverness, negotiation, and quiet defiance. Returning to the main hall, you pause to watch the servants moving in subtle choreography, adjusting silverware, moving chairs, dusting edges, and passing whispered notes. Every movement carries intention, a language of gestures and glances invisible to those who occupy the upper echelons. Fringe historians suggest that these routines created an invisible rhythm of influence and order, allowing servants to shape events while remaining unseen. You smile, recognizing the sophistication in these small acts, the skill required to navigate hierarchy, discretion, and human dynamics. A side alcove near the stairs draws your attention. You crouch to examine faint scratches on the stone, remnants of secret markings or subtle signals left for others in service. You wonder about the hands that made them, the messages intended, the risks taken. Historians still argue whether such markings were intentional or accidental. But in this alcove, they feel deliberate, an unbroken line of invisible communication stretching across time. You touch the worn stone lightly, feeling a connection to generations who navigated these halls with observation, subtlety, and quiet courage. Finally, you pause at a high window overlooking the courtyard, the late afternoon sun painting the stone in amber and gold. Servants move below, carrying tasks, exchanging glances, and maintaining the rhythm of life that the nobles seldom perceive. You take a deep breath, letting the sense of warm stone, polished wood, herbs, and hay fill your senses. Fringe tales hint that the invisible networks of servant life determined much more of castle routine than outsiders believed. Historians still debate the extent, but standing here, you see the truth. The castle exists as a living organism, animated by the careful attention, subtle strategies, and quiet humanity of those who move in its shadows. You carry the weight and wonder of this hidden world with you, knowing that for every visible act of grandeur, countless invisible hands and minds sustain it. The sun dips lower, and the castle quiets, the clatter of kitchens softening, Horses settling into their stalls and corridors emptying save for the occasional servant finishing late tasks. You pause in the hallway, listening to the distant murmur of life fading into gentle silence. The air has cooled, carrying faint scents of straw, herbs, wax, and the lingering aroma of polished wood. Each inhalation feels calming, a reminder that the pulse of the castle, though unseen, is steady, predictable, and comforting. You wander slowly through the corridors, letting the days, routines, and secrets settle behind you. The rhythm of footfalls, whispered conversations, and careful gestures echoes faintly in memory, a lullaby of human diligence and cleverness. You recall every minor prank, hidden note, carefully folded garment, and secret passage you've glimpsed. Fringe stories, scholarly debates, and historical realities blend together into a tapestry of quiet wonder, reminding you that even in the humblest tasks, the human spirit leaves traces that endure. The castle's shadows lengthen, softening the edges of stone and wood. You feel your own heartbeat slow in time with the unseen pulse of laborers and animals, tasks completed and stories preserved. The gentle hush of evening offers reassurance. Life continues, unseen acts matter, and the invisible currents of care, mischief, and ingenuity sustain the great edifice. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum and let the day's journey settle into memory. You feel yourself exhale, your senses tuned to warmth, subtle scents, and quiet rhythm. The castle sleeps, and you too are ready to drift, cradled by the gentle cadence of a world that thrives just beyond sight. A secret life that endures in shadows and whispers. Sleep now, with the comfort that even in service, you are part of something larger, intricate, and timeless.